Good evening. Welcome to the December 17th edition of the Downers Grove Village Council. This is our last meeting of the year. We're glad you're with us. If you're in council chambers, on either side of the room on the shelves are copies of our agenda. If you're at home watching, you might have a better view because if you go to www.downers.us, lower left-hand corner, there is a link to this meeting's materials. In there, you'll find all of the information that we have up here as well. It's a little more interactive. Before we get started, let's rise together and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
April, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Gray?
Here.
Commissioner Colomani?
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Here.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Earl? Here. Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Mayor Barnett?
Here. Thank you. Just like that, we are off and rolling. We have, next item for tonight is approval of previous council minutes. Is there a motion?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the minutes from December 10th, 2019 as presented.
Second.
Are there any council comments on those? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Takes us to item 4, which is a public comment opportunity. We have several of these in the course of our meeting. This first opportunity is for folks to comment on anything not on tonight's agenda. So if you've got something you want to tell us or a comment you want to make, please come down to the podium right here. This is for items not on tonight's agenda. We do ask everybody to come to the podium because it allows those at home to see and hear and kind of participate in the meeting.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Paul Lagno. This is my wife Joyce Lagno. We live at 304 Prairie Avenue, and we copied you all on an email this week, and I just wondered if you had any questions for us.
I do not. Anybody, I suspect we probably would get back directly if we did. I think my recollection, I don't have it up in front of me, my recollection is that that's kind of working through our staff process right now. I don't have any additional questions for the moment.
Okay. I'd like to invite any one of you who would like to watch our friends move from our home to Ohio to come to our home on the 20th, this Friday, or the 21st. You're welcome to come. These are friends of ours that had a baby 2 weeks ago that we invited to stay short-term in our home. I hope you read this letter with earnestness and you read it with the compassion that it deserves. And I would appreciate a response from each one of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have subjects not on tonight's agenda?
David Rose, again, for the last time this year on the subject of environmental sustainability. I brought in 10 handouts for you just to describe what I did. This handout elaborates a little bit further on the handout from last week. I attempted to fill in some of the details I was trying to talk about off the cuff last time. And in so doing, I realized that what might be helpful was to include a couple of tables that I thought would distill for you the essence of the argument I'm trying to make about where I would assert we are with respect to the subject of environmental sustainability and what we face going forward. So just to call briefly attention to the first table, which is on page 2, what I'm suggesting there is that presently most people think of themselves as in this understanding that there are no limits to growth. And then I break that down further by suggesting there are two subcategories, one of which says we need to be more environmentally sustainable, the other of which adds to that the notion that we also need to be socialist. The second table refers to the idea that if the no limits to growth assumption is incorrect, that puts us in the middle column on page 2 and invites us to consider which direction we want to go. To the right, which is what I refer to as the madness, where we are living in a world where limits to growth applies, but we persist in pursuing economic growth, or do we go to the left where limits to growth applies, and we have to figure out a way to pursue either no growth or, as some refer to it, as degrowth, which may also be readily understood perhaps better as the idea of simplifying. So, as I said, treat this as a unit with the handout I gave last time, and I hope you have time to consider it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other comments not on tonight's agenda?
Hi, my name is Vera Miller. I'm a resident of Downers Grove and leader of the Downers Grove Clean Energy Task Force, which several of us spoke about a month ago about environmental sustainability. And we are a community group made up mostly of residents of Downers Grove that are interested in bringing more clean energy to our town and in working with the community, with the village, with businesses, with fellow groups to bring more clean energy to Downers Grove in the form of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable transportation options. So we are very interested, which I know is on the agenda tonight, and I hope the report will be in this room. I couldn't tell if we would get to hear this report about the facilities plan. But we are very interested to learn more about the plans for the new facilities. I understand you're pretty early on in the process. There's a lot to be figured out and determined, and good luck with all of that. But we hope that sustainability will be front and center in that discussion, because I think it's a really great opportunity with the new village hall and the police station to incorporate ways to reduce the village's energy use and reduce their carbon footprint by incorporating potentially solar panels, energy and water saving measures in the buildings, and LEED standards potentially to use more environmentally friendly materials and furnishings for the buildings. So those are all things I hope you will consider and look at really closely in your discussions about this, and I think it's really a great chance to build on Downers Grove's environmental leadership, including with the recent award you won for the Green Fleet, which was great to see. And we really look forward to seeing how the plans develop for the new facilities, and we're happy to share some potentially useful resources that we're putting together from the task force with council members and with staff. So thanks very much, and happy holidays.
Thank you. Anyone else with subjects not on tonight's agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Is there a motion for the consent agenda? Oh, wait a minute. We are removing item C from the consent agenda, accepting the plan for the future of downtown. We will treat that as an active agenda item after consent. So with that, is there a motion for the consent agenda?
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt the consent agenda as presented, absent item C as in Charlie.
Second.
Any council comments? April, please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye. The motion passes unanimously. Now, we're moving previously consent agenda item C to our active agenda. Is there a motion to accept the plan of the future of downtown?
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt the plan for the future of downtown as presented.
Second.
Are there any council comments or questions? Rich?
Yeah, I had a comment. I've been following this issue pretty closely, and I think there's some misunderstanding or perhaps some miscommunication that transpired. When this issue first came to me was in the summer during Rotary Growth Fest, and two residents who live in a condominium approached myself and village manager Dave Fieldman, expressed their concern and dissatisfaction in how much residents had to pay in the past for the SSA and for the TIF. Then we had meetings in the committee room where we discussed that in detail, and I agreed with those residents. So yeah, that's patently unfair, and what we should do is we should have staff make a list of services that the Village of Downers Grove provides to downtown residents, and we should quantify those from a dollar basis and then come up with some sort of fee. In the meetings that transpired at the Downtown Management Corporation, of which I'm a big supporter, meetings that I was not invited to so I didn't get the firsthand knowledge, but as you may suspect, we do get briefed on items in individual council briefings on a weekly basis. And the early input was that the residents were willing to pay a proportional amount, that they felt it was way too unfair, but everyone was willing to pay a proportional amount. And I thought that made sense. We did a lot of study. We determined that there could be a different rate for businesses and for residential. One could argue that businesses get more value out of the downtown area based on what they do. Residents get some intrinsic value. And then what came out of the meeting was that the businesses were to take on the entire burden at a reduced rate from 1.5% to 1%. I thought it would have been fair to help split the burden, not nearly to the amount that was before. I thought 0.5% or 0.25% would have been fair. 0.25%, that would have represented a $275 investment for the residents who live here. And for that, depending on where you live, you get your snow cleared from your sidewalks. You get wonderful decorations in front of your buildings during the holiday, and you get some landscaping. So I thought that might have been worth $275. The reason I asked to pull this off the consent agenda items that we just don't discuss them. It's a fait accompli, and they get an up or down vote. So I just wanted to be heard on that.
Thank you, Rich. Any other council comments or questions? Since we've moved this to active agenda, anybody from the audience want to weigh in on this item? Okay, I'll just say, Rich, I appreciate you taking that off and taking advantage of our rules so you could get that out there. I suspect more than one of us up here has some degree of agreement with you. It was a disappointing process in that I don't know it could have gone any other way, but when you're trying to balance, which is what we do, a lot of competing interests, sometimes the results aren't exactly what you wish for. The good news about this is it keeps our downtown management organization intact and much of the good work that they do. For those that don't know, they're the organization that recruits, retains, attracts downtown businesses, that runs many of our festivals, manages things like Friday night car shows, the things like gingerbread festivals and tree lightings are all an interaction between downtown management and the village. But downtown management does a lot of work to that, and so residents of the village are at large are benefactors of that. As Rich said, some of us would suggest downtown residents are additional benefactors. But what we have before us is an opportunity to keep that organization going and provide many of the services that our residents village-wide expect, where all the participants can live with the result. And so with that, I think we're making progress. April, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colvini?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Pickett?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. The next item on our active agenda tonight is an ordinance to amend Chapter 15.
Mayor, I move that the council adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 15 of the municipal code as presented.
Second.
Any audience comments or questions on amendments to Chapter 15? For those that may recall, last week's meeting, we discussed this briefly. These are some largely clerical things to bring our current local ordinances in compliance with updated state ordinances. Any council comments or questions? April, please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colvini?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Pickett?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion for ordinance amendment relative to zoning provisions?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt an ordinance amending zoning ordinance provisions as presented.
Second.
Any audience comments or questions on this issue? Council comments or questions? April, please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colvini?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Pickett?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that motion too passes unanimously. Is there an ordinance regarding zoning at property on 844 Warren?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt an ordinance rezoning certain property located at 844 Warren Avenue as presented.
Second.
Any audience comments or questions on the rezoning at 844 Warren? Council comments or questions? Marge, please.
Hi, I happened to be at Plan Commission when this was discussed I was there for a different reason, but this was on the agenda, and I was happy that it was. I want to thank staff for getting creative and figuring out how to get this unique business into town. I think all of the neighbors who spoke in favor of it, and they were very excited about it, and it made me very hopeful that this is going to be a very successful business for us. So thank you so much to staff.
Any additional comments or questions? I'll just add, Marge, you hit it on the head, and thank you to everybody involved, not only for helping make this happen, but for recognizing that we have to change and adapt as a community. That's what we do, and this is part of how we remain a vibrant, active community. This is a former gas station, former service center that is now going to be a likely beyond Downers Grove draw for entertainment and for eating, and it's a great opportunity for our downtown. April, please call the roll.
Commissioner Hussain?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colomini?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Cubic?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that motion passes unanimously. Is there another, another motion related to 844 Warren?
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the Village of Downers Grove, Illinois, to designate the property at 844 Warren Avenue as Planned Unit Development Number 61 and authorize a restaurant with year-round outdoor dining as presented.
Second.
Any audience comments or questions? Another component of that development we just discussed? Council comments or questions? April, please call the roll.
Commissioner Hussain?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colomini?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Cubic?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that motion too passes unanimously, and that is the end of our active agenda. Thank you all. Takes us to our mayor's report. The mayor's report this evening includes a resolution to reestablish the Downers Grove Human Services Ad Hoc Committee and appoint members thereto. April, could you please read that?
A resolution reestablishing the Downers Grove Human Service Ad Hoc Committee and appointing members thereto. Whereas on December 18, 2018, the Village Council passed a resolution establishing the Downers Grove Human Service Ad Hoc Committee and appointment of members thereto, resolution number 2018-93, and whereas the Downers Grove Human Service Ad Hoc Committee met numerous times from January 2019 through May 2019 and produced a final report which was forwarded to the Village Council of the Village of Downers Grove for consideration on August 6, 2019, and whereas the Village Council of the Village of Downers Grove considered the Human Service Ad Hoc Committee report at the September 17, 2019 Village Council meeting, and whereas the Village Council of the Village of Downers Grove has determined that it is necessary and desirable to reestablish the Human Service Ad Hoc Committee and reappoint members thereto, now therefore be it resolved by the Village Council of the Village of Downers Grove as follows. Section 1, Human Services Committee reestablished. A Human Service Ad Hoc Committee, hereinafter referred to as the committee, is hereby created. The committee shall automatically dissolve June 30, 2020, unless otherwise extended by the Village Council. B, the committee shall consist of 7 members. The mayor shall appoint the members of the committee subject to the confirmation by the Village Council. All members shall be appointed for the term of the committee unless otherwise removed. Section 2, conduct of meetings, records. A, the committee may establish rules concerning the procedure, meeting, and operation of the committee, which rules shall be consistent with the codes, ordinances, and resolutions of the village and other applicable laws. B, all meetings of the committee shall be open to the public and conform to the Illinois Open Meetings Act. C, the committee shall keep written records of all its meetings and proceedings. Copies of all minutes shall be forwarded to the village clerk. Section 3, powers and duties. The general purpose and duty of the committee shall be, 1, hold regular meetings to discuss and develop more specific recommendations on actions and to prioritize the recommended actions. 2, consider presentations by the Village of Downers Grove departments, Downers Grove Township, DuPage County, and not-for-profit organizations about the human services currently being provided in and around the village. 3, submit a report to the Village Council addressing the issues identified herein for consideration no later than June 30, 2020. 4, perform any additional duties and tasks as the village council may from time to time direct. Section 4, appointment. A, Mayor Barnett has made the following appointments to the Human Service Ad Hoc Committee. 1, Samantha Aycock, Chair of Committee. 2, Kimberly Nagy. 3, Tom Connolly. 4, Chris Gilmartin. 5, Stephanie Williams. 6, Azizi Marshall. 7, Rebecca Campbell. B, the Village Council of the Village of Downers Grove does hereby confirm the aforementioned appointments. Section 5, general provisions. A, all resolutions or parts of resolutions in conflict with provisions of this resolution are hereby repealed. B, this resolution shall be in full force and effect from and after its passage and publication.
Thank you, April.
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt the resolution reestablishing the Downers Grove Human Service and Ad Hoc Committee and appointing members thereto as presented.
Second.
Any council comments or questions? I'll just, a little bit of background. April had quite a mouthful there. Last year, thank you for that. Last year, your village council established an ad hoc committee on human services, and that committee met, and with a lot of diligence and a lot of effort, brought to us a list of needs, a list of community needs, human service needs within Downers Grove. And that was a first start. And what we're asking now is that that committee reconvene and help us take the next step, which is to identify existing service providers that may be out there, which will help us decide and determine whether or not there's a role for the village, and if so, what that role might look like. It's the next step in that process. So we are all, I'm sure, very thankful for those that are willing to serve. We appreciate that effort, and we're looking forward to that work product. April, please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Cullivan?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you all. With that, we are going to adjust our agenda a little bit here. We have a manager's portion of our meeting tonight, which will convene in the committee room. We're going to discuss, as was mentioned earlier, our facilities plan. And so before we do that, I'd like to offer an opportunity for any council member reports or comments that they'd like to add. Those are, I think, better done in here than next door. So does anybody have anything they want to jump into? Rich, please start.
Yeah, I would just like to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you. Leslie?
Yep, I just would like to wish everyone a happy holiday season and a happy and safe New Year.
Nicole?
Ditto.
Yeah,
I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, but also was reminded last week from a text and a phone call that for many, this Christmas will be the first Christmas without someone that they love or have been friends with. And so if you think about those individuals this holiday, send a little extra love, prayers, and just well wishes their way.
Thank you, Kevin.
Ditto.
Well said, Commissioner Gray. Happy holidays, everybody. Be healthy, happy, and safe.
Thank you, Greg. As we kind of wrap up the end of our year here, I did have a couple of additional comments I prepared, and so with your indulgence, as we wrap up 2019 and prepare for 2020, we have an opportunity to pause and reflect. It's that time of year when friends and family connect and reconnect over shared good wishes. The time of year when we consider the year's challenges and successes, and when we take a minute to remember that each other, our friends, neighbors, and shared interactions are what matter most. As in years past, the new year will bring new hopes, new challenges, and most certainly change. And change can be hard, but we define our own circumstance. So let's no longer define change in terms of fear and uncertainty, but instead let's recognize that change brings opportunity. We have some big challenges in front of us. Stormwater isn't going away, our environment isn't going to fix itself, new village facilities aren't going to suddenly appear, pedestrian and traffic dangers remain in front of us, and there's no golden ticket for village finances. A community of 50,000 will always be challenged with managing the frailties that come with being human. But let's be a community that embraces the possibility of change. Let's take every issue that comes before us and define it our way, as opportunities to create tomorrows for our community that are better than yesterday's. During Christmas, some of us will celebrate the birth of Christ, whose message is one of love. In 2016, then President Obama reminded us all that the message of Christmas extends beyond those who celebrate their faith during this season. That it reminds us to treat one another the way we want to be treated. That in Christmas, a message of unity and decency and love. Our village is made up of good people from many backgrounds with many beliefs. I have no doubt that we all share a love of our community. I want to encourage us all to take that love of community and let it manifest itself in love of one another. It's my hope the new year will fill us with understanding, forgiveness, and the space necessary to remember that even in our differences, we're in this life and in this community together. In 2020, let's be intentional. Let's be intentional as we seek ways to help each other and help our community. Let's be thoughtful in the way we speak to each other. And let's remember that together we can harness change to be our very best. So on behalf of my family and the Village Council, I wish our community, our colleagues, both here and on staff, and our village team members a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. With that, we'd like to adjourn to the committee room.
Mayor, I move that we recess to the committee room.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are recessed briefly. It'll be about 5 minutes, and we'll reconvene in the committee room. Thank you all. Thank you all for making the big trip over. We appreciate it. We're going to start our previously identified facilities replacement process. Kind of starts tonight. We have 6, 7 meetings. I don't know what we planned on exactly, but they're in the middle there. 6 of them beginning tonight. And we hope to make some progress on this issue through the course of those meetings. So welcome all tonight. As Dave said, please feel free to ask questions, take pictures of the board. We will have a council discussion and conversation with the village manager. We'll be wanting to entertain questions kind of after that process. This is a workshop committee kind of a thing where we're talking mostly to each other. But we want you guys to be included, so thank you all for coming. Dave.
Thank you, Mayor. And for those watching, the village council members have all been briefed on this meeting individually in my office about a month ago. So now we're doing it as a public body and engaging the community. So if it looks like there are council members who are talking like they've heard this before, it's because they've all heard it before individually. So here we go. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to establish the deliverables, the process and the schedule, and the approach, or the staff recommendations, to the facilities replacement and sustainability plan. So really kind of ground rules and making sure we all are on the same page as to how we're going to go about completing this big and important project. So we're going to talk about expectations on deliverables, process, schedule, and recommendations. The issue, I think, is pretty well known and has been talked about for several years. And the most recent issue identification and discussion was over this summer's long-range planning efforts. Our police station, which is 40 years old, and the Village Hall, the building you're sitting in right now, is 90 years old, and they're both in need of replacement. They have been analyzed by real estate professionals and have been assessed as in a below-average condition. They both lack modern workspaces, and they both have outdated major building systems, which are very expensive to replace and maintain. I mentioned the long-range planning sessions from earlier this year. After thorough discussion, the council directed the following priority action item, which we are kicking off tonight. By the second quarter of next year, the village should create a plan to replace the police station and Village Hall, and we added this, and to ensure the long-term sustainability of these properties, right? So a couple of things that happened over the summer. We identified for sure it's a replacement of these 2 buildings, and we added the concept of long-term sustainability as we go about doing that. We added a couple of bullet points that would inform us and help us in that project. The concept that these replacement buildings could be 2 buildings, police station standalone, Village Hall standalone, but more likely a combined police station and Village Hall somewhere on this property. And that we should continue to explore other uses on this Civic Center property which would reduce the financial impact. So for those of you who've been following this issue for several years, this is a concept that was born about 8 or 10 years ago, and we still think is valid today. We could partner with a private sector developer, townhomes, apartments, office building, etc. Or the partner could be a partner in a different sense. Maybe our development partner is actually an improvement or enhancement to downtown parking. Technically, we'd be partnering with ourselves, but the idea here is Perhaps we use some of the land as additional parking. Or it could be a partnership with other local governments, school districts, park districts, sanitary district, et cetera, that could help defray the costs and address other community needs as well. That we should be paying for this project with existing revenues, revenue from partner developments, and to the extent necessary, we should be exploring new revenue sources. And that we will, since we don't have all of the money we need for this project on hand, sitting around in a fund, we would be using a debt instrument as part of this, and traditionally that would be issuance of general obligation bonds, so that the residents who are paying for the project are the ones that are actually enjoying the benefits of this project, pay as you use bond issuances. So that's what we talked about this summer. That's a frame up of the issue, and we talked about the purpose of tonight's meeting. So what I'd like to do now is actually go through those 3 bullet points here. First, we're going to talk about the deliverables, or what is in this actual plan. And we'll talk about what questions the plan will answer, and probably most importantly, at what level of detail, so that we all understand what to expect by the time we've completed the plan. Then we'll go through the process and the schedule, and then we'll go through 10 recommendations that staff has based on our experience from earlier this year when we kicked off the project. So, we plan to put together what we'll call a facilities replacement and sustainability plan. We'll try to get that done in about 4 months. So we believe that this plan will answer 5 key questions, pretty basic questions. What will be constructed? Where will it be constructed? When? How much will it cost? How are we going to pay for it? Right, so really basic questions. How will we go about answering them, at what level of detail is important? And this is where we want to make sure all the council members are on the same page as far as expectations. The answer to the question, what will be constructed, really has 3 components. The first component is the project scope for the village portion of the project. And what we envision is just a listing of the project elements for the village. For sure, a police station. For sure, a new village hall. Probably, most likely, enhancements to the intersection of Washington Street and the railroad tracks. That's an example of the project scope. There may be others. It will also include what we call the space program or space needs. This document has already been prepared, frankly, with our last go-around, and it's really sort of a spreadsheet that determines the size of the building that needs to be constructed to address village issues. So, expressed in terms of square feet, a spreadsheet, listing of rooms, et cetera, total size. What will be constructed? The answer will also be a project scope for any of our development partners, if we so choose to have one. So, same idea here. It will be a listing of the partner aspects of the development. Probably expressed in terms of generalities, a general land use. So it's our needs as a village plus townhomes, or parking, or what have you. And it'll generally be expressed in terms of a size, number of units, if it's residential. If it's an office building, general square footage, in a range. We won't have specifics yet at this point. If it's additional parking to enhance parking services in the downtown, it'll be a range of parking spaces. So these are the aspects of answering the question, what will be constructed? Where will it be constructed? This one's pretty straightforward. This will be a preliminary site plan. It will generally show the outline of the elements of the project scope. Footprint of a building, how many buildings, general ideas for improvements to Washington and the railroad tracks, right? I think we've all seen these before. For those of you who are a little more involved in the planning aspects, this is a plan that's not quite to the level that you might be submitted for a plan commission hearing. It's just shy of that. When we get to the recommendations, we'll talk about some advanced work that will go into this to anticipate issues that we've learned about. So that addresses where will it be constructed. When will it be constructed? It also is a pretty simple question with a straightforward answer. Obviously, we're going to prepare a preliminary project schedule. But this schedule will not be just the construction aspects. We're talking about a complete project schedule, from planning and design all the way through demolition of the existing buildings and the construction of all phases, village components, partner components, etc. This time around, and you'll hear this again at recommendations, we believe this schedule needs to address upfront the public input process. The schedule for how are we going to engage the public in general? Are we using boards and commissions? If so, for what? To what extent? Making sure that that public input process is put into the preliminary schedule up front. We also think this project schedule, given this early stage, will be expressed in terms of quarters of years as opposed to a certain week or a certain day. Right? We're just not to that level yet. So expressed in quarters. The next key question, how much will it cost? Will be answered in terms of a preliminary cost estimate. Again, all aspects of the project, not just the construction, but every aspect of the project. This will be expressed not in terms of a specific dollar, but a range of dollars, right? We want to make sure that when the final project comes in, that it's somewhere within that range as far as cost. To prepare this preliminary project estimate, we envision hiring a professional with a lot of knowledge in real estate development and construction, and then we envision handing that firm the project scope, the space program, and the preliminary site plan so they can build a preliminary cost estimate sort of from those elements, right, so that it matches. So the question, how much will it cost, answered with a preliminary cost estimate. How will the village pay for this project? Will be answered really with two components. Number one, a preliminary project budget, which has both revenues and expenses. Okay, the expenses, we know where we're getting that. That will be based on the budget for expenses will be based on this project cost estimate that we just talked about. But that's only half the equation. There will be revenues as well. We need to make sure that we have revenues equal to the cost of this project. In addition to that budget, which is preliminary revenues and preliminary costs, will be a financing plan. As I said earlier, even though I don't know exactly what our cost estimate for this project will be, I know we don't have, as a village, that kind of money sitting around waiting to be spent on this project. So we will be using some sort of debt instrument. So we will be preparing a preliminary financing plan that will have the source of funds that will be used to pay for the project, debt and equity. It will have a recommendation and a plan for what debt instruments we will be planning to use, and preliminary debt payment schedules, right? And so we'll make sure that the revenues align with the preliminary debt service fund, right? We've seen this before, several of you worked on this. But what's unique, I think, about Downers Grove is we go beyond cost estimating, we go into full budgeting, and we take it one step further and go into financing plans at this stage. So 5 key questions. How are they going to be answered at what level? Before I move on to process and schedule, just want to pause there to see if there are any council questions or concerns about what this plan will entail and at what level.
I think that maybe you need to extend by quarter maybe, because I think we need more public input than is going to be available before 5/20. I think some of this stuff that needs to be talked about and vetted is going to take a lot longer than we think it is. And I think you're going to need to add some meetings and that.
Could you expand on that? What do you have in mind?
I know, Greg, you're much further along in this process than I am, but I feel like not only are we back at square one, but we are prior to square one. We've got new you and I are in a different place than Leslie and Kavanaugh. Rich is in a different place. Bob's in a different place. Where everybody has, some of us have done iterations of this already, and we have different questions. Some of us, some of this stuff doesn't touch on any of that stuff, and since we are going back to square one, we don't have to take any of those preconceived notions that we had about the last plans or the last few plans that we had and bring them with us. We are, we can put back in thoughts about, do we want, some performing space, which was actually touched on with an entire study years ago. Is it a bigger, does it need to be a bigger project? Does it need to be in a different place? I don't know. I think that there's a whole lot of things we should be talking about because there's a whole new group of people talking about them. And we should all be coming along at the same rate. And maybe the answer is don't change, but maybe they do. And I just think that everybody needs to come along together, and that includes the public and our new commissioners, so.
So let me jump in here. I think a couple things. One is, I think what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and finish the presentation and turn it all over to the village council. But this concept here of public input during the preparation of this plan versus public input when we actually get into doing the design of the building, when we get into board and, right? So there's two aspects of public input. There's public input during this meeting process, and there's public meeting when we sort of start actually the project, right?
Yeah, I'm
So-
not talking about brick, I'm not talking about, what color brick should we use?
Right.
Or what the building should look like. I'm just, even, we need to decide where it's gonna be, we need to decide, and.
Public
maybe-
input during this stuff.
Right.
Right, okay.
All of this stuff needs to have more, a longer public input time, I believe.
So let me go through these last two components, and then we'll turn it back over to the mayor, and we'll see.
Before you do, I want to remind my colleagues that one of the things that's important about tonight is to have these kinds of conversations. So everybody, if you even have a question that you think might be a dumb question, ask it. Because what we're about to do, whether it's 520 or 620 or 420, what we're about to do is start consuming enormous amounts of staff energy and staff resources, and frankly, at the expense of other possible things. We went through that HPAI process and determined there was a lot of stuff we were putting off because we were going to dedicate ourselves to this. So we do not want to be doing that if we don't have, a good consensus, a good majority pointing in the right direction. So please make sure when Dave finishes that we're all talking. And if you got nothing to say and you want to nod in agreement, that's fine too, but please don't hold anything back. Just, let's talk about it. Okay?
All right, so let me present the process and schedule for the preparation of this plan, which answers 5 questions. Okay, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. This is the process and schedule for preparing the plan, not completing the project. There's no way we're going to complete a project in 4 or 5 months. We're just going to get a plan together for the project. All right, so here's what we envision, is a 5 meeting process that takes place over a 5-month period to create this plan. First meeting is tonight, where we introduce the project, and we, as a council, the council establishes the deliverables, process schedule, and confirms the staff recommendations, whether we're going to follow those or not. The next, we would meet once a month, January, February, March, and April. In January would be the first meeting where we would present multiple options for answering all of these questions. What we envision at this point is in January, you will see 3, 4, 5, 6 sets of options, each with their own sets of answers to these questions, right? Right, so each iteration, option 1, has an answer to the what is it, where is it, when, how much, and the financing plan, right? So we'll present those multiple options in January. We'll continue to discuss those at a second meeting in February. By the third meeting in March, we're hoping that by then we will be in the process at the point of identifying and developing the preferred option. And then by April, hopefully saying, okay, this is the plan. To Commissioner Earle's point, as we go through this, remember one of the elements is the public input for when we actually start to design the building. What I think Commissioner Earle was saying here is this schedule, the act of deciding which of these options we're going to approve may require significant public input just in this portion of planning. So I think I hear Commissioner Earle saying, hey, let's be careful that this is not going too fast or shorting public input to help the council get consensus on the answers to these questions.
Yes.
Okay. So we envision a 5-month process starting tonight and moving through about May May would be, then let's, under this schedule, we have a plan and then we start the actual project. If the council feels comfortable and you see the options in January and there's like a magic, this is it, and we go, great, it goes faster. If there's a need for council deliberation, public input, et cetera, then of course this schedule could get longer. Just want to touch on the last one, third component, recommendations, or our approach to this project. Council certainly recalls, and many in the public recall, that about a year ago, we were presented with a development proposal from an office, a medical office developer, and was such a good offer, we started down a road where we were moving forward with that partner and doing our facility plan. And we spent, as a staff, about a month and a half or 2 months working incredibly hard and incredibly fast at a detail level. And what that allowed us to do is learn so much more about this project, and especially about this particular site and the unique challenges of this site. And from that experience, we come up with 10 recommendations that we think will help us in this next iteration. The first 3 in blue speak to about how we go about our partnership approach here. The first one I already mentioned is this is really a confirmation that our idea that we could redevelop this site to make us more efficient on this site and free up space on this property that could be sold to a developer or could be used for a partnership public sector developer is a good idea. We believe that that works and should continue to be followed as a way of monetizing this underutilized asset called the Civic Center property. So that is a recommendation that's really more of the same. Also, I mentioned this earlier, we believe that we should be exploring partnership opportunities that not only look at options for private sector, townhomes, apartments, office, but public sector, perhaps school districts, perhaps sanitary districts, perhaps park districts. And then the third option recommendation here is if the council believes that or wants to enhance parking level of service in the downtown, we could use the Civic Center property that we create the extra space here as we become more efficient. Could be a way to move commuter parkers out of the downtown parking deck to free up spaces in the heart of our downtown for other users. That, of course, does not give us any new revenue. It's just cost avoidance if we had decided to build something more parking in the downtown. All right, the next set of recommendations, this is probably the most important here. The village should be the primary driver of this project, making sure that as we go through this, that this is really not about the private sector or development partner. This is first and foremost, are we addressing the facilities needs for our residents now and in the future? Are we sustainable? Did we put the buildings in the place that makes sense for us? Did we build the right size building? It may seem strange that we put this up here, but one of the things we realized is with the last approach, when we had this developer with us, we were getting all sorts of efficiencies in terms of time, and frankly, lots of money was on the table to the benefit of our community. But we realized the way we were site planning this, it was the office developer who was driving the site plan, and we were becoming secondary. And as we got through the design of this building at the staff level, we realized we were making a series of very small concessions and compromises that each, when we made them at the staff level, and never came forward to the council, but we were preparing our recommendations. As we did that, we thought each of those individually were fine. But when we were taking a step back and doing lessons learned, we realized we may have been heading down a path where we would have gotten a building that was good, but not great. Didn't fully address our needs. So we should be the primary driver of our own project, and then what's left over should be for any development partner. Second thing, avoid temporary relocation of police station and village hall. Police station, we had always, for multiple years of planning this, think it's not easy to relocate a police station temporarily. You basically have to operate out of another town's police station. So that's always been on our list. But the last iteration of this plan called for temporary relocation of village hall. What we found is there aren't any buildings in town readily available that will accommodate all village hall workers in one place within the budget we had established in a way that would allow us to continue to deliver valued resident services during the project, right? And so we were about to come to the council on the last iteration of this project saying, we are really struggling finding a place for village hall operations during construction. So this time, we are recommending that we try to avoid relocation temporarily of both. So the idea here is build our new building on this site, move once into the new building. Second, the next recommendation here regarding scope is what the project should not include. Those of you familiar with this project know that there is a village vehicle fleet garage maintenance facility on the east side of this property. If you were going to locate that type of service today, this might be one of the last places you would put it. Right? It's tucked in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's hard to get to. It really wants to be closer to where most of our larger vehicles are out by Public Works, et cetera. So what we're recommending, though, is to not tackle that issue just yet, but approach this project with an eye towards the future, that someday fleet will relocate, and how should that land be used in the future. The reason we don't think we should include the fleet garage relocation as part of this project is, number one, we don't currently own any land where to put it, and if we were to tackle that project, we'd be into a site identification, building identification, land acquisition, design a new building, which in and of itself may be as big as the police station and village hall project. And right now, the fleet garage is in pretty good condition. It's much better shape than our other two buildings. So our recommendation is to not include fleet garage right now as part of this project, but have an eye for the future of what that property could look like when fleet does move. Next recommendation has to do with actual construction phasing. This recommendation is that when we go to build, the village should build our building first. Previous iterations of this plan had concurrent construction happening. Village building and private sector building, and the other iterations going up at the same time, and then multiple phases as the site allowed, as buildings were demolished. We think from a delivery of service standpoint, making sure that we remain operational and a value to our residents, that not only should we drive the project in terms of scope and site planning, we should actually construct first, then our existing buildings come down, and then the rest of the property gets turned over to, if we pick a private sector developer or other partner. Next recommendation is that we need to develop concept site plans very early in the process. We always had conceptual level site plans early in the process. What we're really saying here, I guess, is that we need to have concept site plans that can withstand the realities of construction and what we learned in the last go-around. There's a communication tower here which has to be, basically remain somewhere on the site for 911 type services. There's a 12 to 14 foot grade change on this property. There are some unique aspects of fleet operations of vehicles coming in and out of there that really limit how we can use the far eastern portion of this property. There's some floodplain on this property. There's an 11-foot underground storm pipe that goes through this property. When we previously prepared concept site plans, we were generally aware of those things, but now we know a heck of a lot more at the detail level. So the concept site plans that you're going to see in January are going to be prepared with detailed knowledge of these things, right? So they'll still be at the conceptual level, but they will be much more informed and likely to withstand the reality of actual construction should we get that far. This one we've already talked about. Establish the public input process as we start. The last iteration of plans was sort of reactionary because we had an offer that came to us that was good and we accepted. We didn't take the time to establish expectations about public input process, and therefore we were just about ready to come to the council and say, okay, how do you want to do this? What's the role of boards and commissions? How do we want to engage the public? The challenge we had is we were on such a tight schedule, we really hadn't built that into the schedule. So we're saying this is important to the village. We should establish that early on. The last recommendation of our 10 here is slightly different than the last iterations of our planning efforts. Staff recommends that we identify one preferred development partner option by the time we get done with this plan, not multiple. The last couple of times we've done this, we got to the end of this planning stage and we said, let's go out for proposals for apartments and townhouses and an office building, what everybody else wants to build. What that did is it created so many options and iterations, it became difficult to sort of sort through apples and oranges in the proposals. We're recommending that by the time we get to the end of this, we should have one recommended land use type for partners and go out for RFPs, requests for proposals on just one type, so we can get apples to apples and then move forward more efficiently. I'm going to stop there for 2 reasons. That's the end, and I'm struggling with my voice. So, Mayor.
Get yourself a water. Thanks, Dave. So this is time for us to talk about this. I'll remind everybody that what we're looking at was same skeleton, less meat in LRP. We kind of decided that this was what we thought we wanted to do, and this is the first step in that high priority action item plan as defined by the LRP. So this is not new tonight to us. It's got a little more meat. It also wasn't new when we had those one-on-one meetings they referred to. Those were, again, follow-ups to that LRP process. So this is probably the 4th-ish time that we've talked kind of in these terms. So we need to be clear. I think Marge was very clear on the public input question, but there's an odd number of us on purpose, and we need to be very clear about how it is we'd like to move forward. I'll touch on that one. As Marge said, we each have different spots that we come from and different levels of depth on this thing, and mine is probably deeper, or at least as deep as some of the deeper ones here. One of the things that I see on this issue is that we have in there, this public input process is not excluded necessarily from here. There are, it looks like at least 2 months between this 121 presentation and this 317 preferred option, when, I mean, that's 60 days. Now, we're not looking for stuff to do, we're not looking for meetings to add, but if the question is, are there opportunities, while we don't know what those look like and are structured like today, they certainly exist in this calendar to potentially do stuff like that. I think we'd be trying to figure out sometime between now and that January meeting what we expected of those, what does public input mean? But there is time, 2 months worth of time in that window to have public input opportunities.
I describe it as 3. but-
Yeah.
I don't think anybody that's ever been elected to the village council in Downers Grove, at least in 20 years, wants to do this without public input. I just don't believe it. We've never actually demonstrated that, and I don't think we're going to start now. But I guess I don't see that this process, this schedule has to be extended in order to accommodate that.
I didn't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate that we're talking about the space program, because frankly, we landed on the moon faster than we're building these buildings. There's a level of complexity to this, to be sure. But the idea that, we're the same council that we were 6 months ago when everybody first took office, or, that we need to suddenly, put training wheels on certain folks, I mean, it's just simply not true. We have already had meetings on this through the long-range planning process. We've got more to come. We've got 3 months at least worth of public input opportunities. And frankly, we all come from different spots, different depths on this, and that's certainly true. And I'm not sure that all that depth is necessarily a positive, at least in every way. The fact that we're doing this now for the 4th or 5th time since at least the mayor and I have been up here, it kind of speaks volumes. We've got a lot of opportunity to hear a lot of folks, and I think we're going to hear from at least a few tonight. And there's more and more opportunities every week. Mr. Rose talks to us about environmental sustainability week after week. He's holding our feet to the fire, and kudos to him for doing that. Folks can always come to a meeting and talk during public comment, even if this isn't on the agenda. They certainly don't hesitate to email, call, and as well they should. There are plenty of opportunities for public comment, and I don't believe we need to extend it.
So, Commissioner Rose, I'm just going to put you on the spot. Are you thinking you're, given the information we have now, yes to this approach here?
Absolutely. And then with regard to the recommendations, I think we're hitting it pretty well on the head here. We really have prioritized other developments first. And first and foremost, we are a service organization. Whether it's delivering police and fire, whether it's plowing the roads, whether it's delivering a permit that's been applied for. These are all services that our residents expect and deserve. And the only way to prioritize that service delivery is to prioritize the village's construction of these buildings. And that means avoiding the temporary relocation of these facilities and building the buildings first. And I think, put all those lessons we learned along the way in these, especially in the last iteration, is very important, and I'm glad to see that we're on the road to implementing them.
So I'm going to put you down as a general, yep, is there anything on here that gives you pause on this list?
Because of the word consideration in the third, or consider in the third bullet, I'm willing to live with that. I have some heartburn over relocating folks to the Civic Center property, only because I'm interested to see what the site plan looks like. So I think that'll all flush itself out.
But generally okay, but we'll put a little question mark
I
on
think
that one.
we have to consider it. I'm concerned about where it might go.
Frankly, that's the base site plan anyway, so it's where you start before you add the partner, so we'll show it to you whether it's a full consideration. You'll see it anyway.
Right. And then I suspect we'll hear a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but the fleet garage, I would probably add an ellipsis for now. I agree with you that if we were going to start the Village of Downers Grove all over again, we would not put it where it's currently located. And while I believe it should not be part of this phase of the project, I would love to see another phase that comes after this where we do actually go through the process of identifying where else to put it and actually move that facility.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
Jump in. You can arm wrestle.
I have some input, but I have some foundational comments. First of all, I think it would be useful for the public to understand the way we operate. Dave is, if we were a corporation, Dave is our CEO. There's some senior staff members here, some others that report directly to the council. They're spending 40, 50 X hours of weeks specifically doing their job. They're drilling into a great level of detail. We are the board of directors that meets 3 times a month, and we're supposed to give direction, and I sit in this room, not as often as long as you have, but there comes a point in time where Dave says, okay, I understand the direction, thank you very much. Now let us go back and do our work. These people here and the 49,000 other people who didn't show up tonight for some reason are like the stockholders, and they're very involved stockholders because they pay the taxes that support all of this. They come up with good ideas. I came up with some good ideas. One thing I learned very early in this job is find out why your good ideas won't work. Yeah, that's a great idea, but I was a big proponent of moving fleet out of here until you realize that servicing a huge fire truck or a snowplow at 2 a.m. on Sunday morning in the middle of winter is a little bit different than taking your Chevy to the service station and having it fixed. And then as we come up with various ideas, one of the early ideas came up, well, maybe we should move this from this site and consider moving west of here, Ellsworth or something like that, and then you realize, well, there are TIF considerations. People have said, well, what about 63rd and Belmont? What about 75th and Lamont Road? So I guess the point I'm making, I think it would be useful if we kept a running list of frequently asked questions where we could, on our website, keep our citizens informed as to, well, why can't we do this, or why can we do that? Why do we have to be located here? And then that would save us a bunch of time. Things like, well, why don't you renovate the police station, or why don't you renovate this? So we don't have to kind of redo those things.
I just wanted to jump in. That's kind of also what I was saying, is maybe maybe a meeting that just goes over everything we've already considered, that touches on, we looked at this and we thought about that, and then we were here and then we were there, and we tried all of this, and now all of this is off the table, and why? So just
How did
the
we get here,
history.
Tom?
How did we get here?
A historical look at
Didn't we kind of do
facilities.
that during
There you
long-range
go.
planning?
Perhaps.
Historical, not in 60 seconds that Doug does. It's probably going to take longer than that, but
Well, I thought that's kind of the history we went through during the long-range planning process.
we
I
didn't.
mean, we covered an awful lot of how did we get here and you know, what the various options were. We started narrowing things down to the idea of replacement. That's how the word replace got into the long-range plan. I mean, we've done this before, and pretty recently.
We have. One of the things that I recall from the too long maybe that we've already talked about this, some of us, is you have a meeting in 2000 on the subject, and somebody comes and says, well, have you thought about rehabbing the buildings? I'd like to understand if that's a good option. Right? And then you don't end up doing anything. And you have another meeting in 2004, and you get to the point and somebody says, well, have you thought about rehabbing the buildings? Because that seems like that would be a good thing. And then a week ago, I was asked, have you thought about rehabbing the buildings? But that's legit, right? Those are really honest, meaningful questions that people seriously want to know the answers to. Well, the challenge is, how do you address that without causing this to be sort of the moonshot that never ends? And so I just kind of reacting here to Rich's comments. I mean, the idea that you can keep pointing somebody to an FAQ, and that might be, 4 drill downs of links once they get there, but it gives everybody the opportunity to go looking for that stuff, because there has been so much work done over so many years, and there's 7 levels of depth of understanding of that here, plus the team. But I would hate to be sitting here in mid-March revisiting questions that have been answered 3 or 4 times over the last 15 years. I'd really like to avoid that.
Yeah, and I don't even necessarily know that we need a meeting to do that, but I love the idea of the questions on the website. And while we've talked about all of these things before, I think it's safe to say that people might not have been engaged at that point, but once it's at the forefront, will become more engaged. And so, yes, we've discussed it, and yes, it's been put out there, but again, like you've mentioned, Mayor, people ask the same questions, and so I think it would be great to have a place that they could just go, or that we could direct them to for all of those questions and answers. I think that was a wonderful idea.
Well, the other analogy here is we all learned a real lot when you gave us the individual briefing, things that I had no idea. Boy, lessons learned, because we went down that. We tried to create this path. So even capturing this information, but I think we learned from our mistakes. I think we learned from our experience. I think we've learned from all those iterations. But if this is analogous to a car trip, I don't want to be going down I-65 to get to Florida and say, hey, I need to turn around and do the last 300 miles over again. That's in the rearview mirror. So we have to be mindful of those things. I just don't think we need to relive it, because a lot of those iterations failed for a reason, and we've learned from those things. And I think if we could articulate that to the community, they'll be better equipped to kind of have the same kind of briefings when you bring us in on a Wednesday night for 90 minutes or 2 hours to brief us on these things.
Well, and I think a lot of what staff has laid out here, at least for me, takes our experience. I'm actually, when bad things happen at the time, it's awful, but the idea is that you learn something from it. With every experience, you should be learning something. And so I'm, in a small way, grateful that all of that happened to us with this last iteration of this project, because now we have learned and we've been able to come up with this plan and these recommendations.
So you're good with these recommendations?
I am, yes. I agree with Marge on the public input. I mentioned that during my individual meeting as well. I appreciate the fact that we've established a public input process, though I do agree that through these next several meetings, there will be time for public input, which is great. I think what Rich's suggestion is wonderful, which will aid in that, which was something that was not previously mentioned. I'm in the same boat as Commissioner Jose in terms of considering the relocation. So, I mean, yes, I understand we're going to consider it, but my feelings are very similar on that.
I think everybody, because we talked about this in the parking plans last week.
Yeah.
Dave, I have a question that kind of goes to the site plan. It may have been something that's covered that I haven't seen. My first interaction with this building, the first thought I had was, why is this place so big? And then you get the backstory, and you do the tour of this facility, you do the tour of the police station, and there are things that jump out that you can see, upgrades, repairs. But what struck me the most was the cost inefficiencies associated with workflow. And this is a question I've thrown out before. Do we have any information from the previous site plan that speaks to that? Because that's extremely important. As someone that's seen this for the first time, I feel like I've gotten caught up to speed very quickly on everything that we are seeing and doing. I think that's really important to just kind of wrap, even us as well as the public to wrap our heads around. As it comes to the recommendations, the recommendations are pretty straightforward. Even seeing some of these items for the first time, I think our timeline or our schedule is right. Having been walked through the fleet facility, it only takes that tour one time to realize that almost feels like a phase 3 type of a project after facilities here, possible partner, and then possible fleet at whatever point. But everything in terms of our timeline and just being able to fit community engagement in this process feels like that is a good schedule.
We will also tell the community the story of how this started as a ball bearing factory built in 1929. It is way too big for the small number of staff members that still work here.
Yeah, I think if there's anything that we have, just to even share amongst us and to even kind of that we have going forward would be super.
We do have a lot of this stuff already. We've been doing facility planning since 2007. I think we got some of this covered somewhere, so we'll have to package it up for everybody.
Well, mentioning the tour, there were maybe a dozen people. It was great that they showed up. However, I think if we could record a tour that people could click on and have that same kind of narrative with the voice of Downers Grove narrating.
Not going to write that on the board because we've actually already started that one. That's coming.
I thought you did. Regarding fleet, I think it would be a wonderful opportunity for intergovernmental cooperation to look at other units of government within a radius that has the same problem. How do they fix their big old fire engines? How do they fix their plows at 2 o'clock in the morning? And could we consolidate that and work together? I think from some of the other government officials I spoke with, there's a great attitude that, hey, let's look to help out all our constituents in that regard.
Yeah. We the village already have operating agreements where we maintain CSPAR, District 58, sometimes senators, others, Commissioner Cobain's talking about the next level, which are the specialty vehicles, and we're actually dipping our toe in that right now as well.
I have a lot of comments. So I am pretty good with the schedule. I think that throughout those months, we'll have plenty of opportunity for public comment. I think we really need to walk the fine line between rushing into things, and I'll speak on that a little bit later, and going so slowly that we miss out either on opportunities or we create new problems for ourselves. I do think that the thought of having an FAQ is a great idea, because then those who are concerned about why aren't we rehabbing, why are we building a new building, that can be taken care of. But we are still giving people potentially 3-4 meetings to comment on some of these, knowing that as we get further into the process, there's going to be plenty more places for the public to comment on what we actually do with this plan. In terms of the recommendations, I'm along the same lines of, I'm not incredibly interested in relocating our commuter parkers, but, it's fine to consider it. And I agree that the fleet garage kind of needs to wait a little bit. I would like to see it soon, but not in conjunction with anything that we'll be doing here. I just find that, I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that we pay as we use in terms of the way that you were talking about financing. I think it's really critical that from the very beginning, we consider this to be a value to the community. It's not just a building, it's not a thing that we have to pay for. It is part of the service to our community that we do, and many of my fellow commissioners have mentioned all of the role that the village plays in everyone's lives. Nobody wants to have to pony up more money. Nobody wants to have an increase in taxes or know that we have to fund these bonds. But realistically, this is the future of our village. This is the future for our kids, our grandkids, and whoever else we move into this community. And I think that we need to look at it in terms of a value to our residents and to our families and to our friends and to everyone who uses this community, and not just a thing or a building. I think sometimes that gets away from us, especially as we weren't necessarily in control of that project. But this literally is the hub of our village. This is how everything gets done. And I think we really need to make sure that we're taking that perspective and not losing sight of that. I also know that we discussed a little bit that site plan, and I just am always a little bit concerned that we're at kind of our leanest point that we've been in decades. And I want to make sure that as we start planning for this space, that we recognize that if we ever have a potential to expand, that we don't squeeze ourselves too tightly, knowing that we might have this building for decades to come. So that's just one thing.
Might.
Well, we hope to have this decades to come. So we want it to be a sustainable building from a personnel perspective. We've talked a lot about from an environmental perspective, just to make sure that we're taking care of our residents down the road. And that's why I am so happy that we are making the decision to be the drivers in this process. As an outsider who was not part of the council when all of this was happening, it always looked as though we couldn't move fast enough. And that was frustrating. And now that to be on this side and kind of see the history of what happened, you recognize it is because others were the drivers. We weren't going to be getting the building that we necessarily would want, and we couldn't move fast enough. And so, like I said, I think it's just going to be that fine balance between making sure that we move quickly enough to get things done, but not moving so slowly that we perhaps miss out on opportunities. So I think those are most of my comments for the process part.
I should state that I agree with the process, I agree with the approach. As far as Commissioner Earle's comments, I think we'll have plenty of opportunities to adjust this if we need to for more public input. I would encourage us to get in front of the communications right now. It's, I'm sure it's frustrating for people when they find out something, and particularly like it's a second reading, we're ready to pass it. Somebody said, I just found out about this on Saturday. So if we can go out in front, we have our electronic means to do that. We have our village newsletter. If we could be up front explaining this process, inviting the people to the meetings, I think that would be useful.
Kayla, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I kind of want to just echo support for what you just mentioned, Leslie, that this, one of the questions that I have, just kind of as I've been taking in this process, I think one of the ones that you hit on, Sorelli, what are some of the ways we continue to capture value for the community in these early stages? And this kind of spun off of a conversation with the commission I was having based on a trip and watching as you travel, areas that construct or put together new facilities, but in doing so, as you mentioned, whether it be for the staff that utilizes those facilities, or just the fact that when you fast forward where we are 10 years, 20 years from now, this area becomes the heartbeat of Downers Grove. If you can really just take a moment to fast forward and to see what that looks like in your mind, that's what it is. And so when I think about that, that was one of the questions, and even capturing pictures of, hey, what does that space look like as residents pass through it? And I don't know, I have no parameters for it, I have no ideas for it, I don't know if it's a small park, I don't know if it's green space in the center that everything builds around, but that is kind of a piggyback to this other question. As we as commissioners look to put these puzzles of the pieces together, what becomes the minimal, for lack of kind of altering this a little bit, the minimal viable project elements that need to go into making a effective, functioning, working facility? And so when you mentioned that, it kind of brought me back to seeing the space of a place that just went up and watching the engagement of the workers and the community use this space, and then they went back and they used the space. And so I think I early capture input. I think those were, I didn't want to miss that, but just wanted to echo support for that.
So all the planners, Stan, Jason, Gabby, Flora, they just applauded that little set of questions for sure. Thank you.
And I think that's what this is all about. I mean, it's about a better use of the space we've got. And we know that the space we have now has become quite valuable because of what we've done downtown, in the heart of the downtown. This space now becomes more part of the downtown, and it's become more valuable. And as a result, we have to ask ourselves, should this be the place where this giant communications tower is? Do we want to work around it? You know, I'm hearing a disconnect in the, we can't find a place to move all the village hall people to that's a big enough space, yet the village hall is much too big for the number of people that we have. So, well, can we move them all to the front of the building, take off the back, and is there something more we can do with the space behind us as opposed to the space in front of us? I have so many questions in my head that they're just kind of bursting out of there, and it's all because we know that we need to think long term about this parcel of land that we're on, and do the best we can for the whole downtown. And maybe what we've been thinking of isn't the best, and you know, I struggle with some of that.
I think piggyback a little bit on what Greg and Leslie were talking about. I mean, we as a community do four things. Not being ridiculously broad, right? But we plow snow and deal with our streets, call that public works. We provide police protection, we provide fire protection, and then we manage the permit process and the safe delivery of water. Staff is going to kill me because there's 500 other
Police,
things.
fire, sewer, water, roads.
But that's what we do. And our public works facility is in pretty reasonable modern shape. Our fire departments are in pretty reasonable modern shape, and we've spent quite a bit of money on those over the last 10 years. But these two components of what we do, we haven't, and we've let them go. Let them go is too big a word, but we started this idea 12 years ago that we might replace them, so we've kind of had that in the back of our mind. But those are two services that residents expect and demand and should have the expectations of a high-quality level of service and zero interruption. And so when we say we want a plan to continue to deliver those, in my mind, these are bigger, more expensive snowplows. These are bigger, more expensive police cars. This is a tool absolutely necessary to provide and deliver the services that our residents expect. And so I think that prioritizing it as opposed to a development or a development partner or something like that is entirely appropriate. But on the backside of that, on this, whether it's phase 2 or phase 7 or however we want to call it, we also know, I've been talking about this in various ways, that developing value on individual parcels throughout the village is super critical to the long-term health financially of the village. Whether it's single individual residential properties that get redeveloped, or it's commercial properties that get redeveloped, or it's big non-tax-paying parcels that turn into taxpayers. It is super critical to the long-term health and sustainability of the village financially that individual property values, whether it's ours or anybody else's, are increased over time. That people invest and reinvest in the property that they own, because that's how we get a lot of our revenue. And so, in my mind, this properly prioritizes the delivery of services with tools that are necessary and follows that up with the maximizing of value to the financial base that supports everything else we do in the village. I think we should do this as fast as we can, as quickly as we can, because I think it's all the right moves. There will not be a time in a process. If we went on this process and started on 520 with some plan that we were going to knock out in 18 months, there will not be a component between then and the end where we're not all sitting around, I'm not too sure, I wonder if that will be part of the kind of process. So there's a certain amount of, are we hitting the priorities in the proper order, and then just letting it play out. And 5 years from now, I was giving Leslie some crap with this, I hope it lasts more than a decade or so, but I guarantee 5 years out, we will look back and say, I wish. For sure. But we're going to fix a lot of really known problems in the meantime, and add to the value of our community, which I think we absolutely should do.
What I think excuse me, I think what we're hearing a bit too is what exactly is the definition of value, right? I mean, that's talking about green space, or talking about meeting space, or talking about performance space. Now, these are, you know, really high-level, you know, sort of gut check kind of questions. And, you know, I look forward to talking about them over the next 90, 120 days, whatever it is. Because it is, you know, this land is more valuable because of the building we've seen downtown. Valuable not just because of, you know, dollars and cents, but because of all the various things we could do with it. So it's an important part of the conversation.
Anybody, council, want to jump in on something, or should we take some comments from the audience that's here?
I would like to hear public comment,
Yeah.
personally.
So you've heard us all ramble. Does anybody want to jump in? And please go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. Yes, I remember pretty vividly what's gone on for the last 12 years. I don't see a need to go back over the medical building, apartment, townhome options that I think all of us as residents were pretty involved in that. I mean, I don't speak for others, but I recall well the discussion around rehabbing the buildings or fixing them up versus replacing them. So I don't personally see a need to revisit that, but I'm really comforted and happy to hear that the focus is on the Civic Center location for the Village Hall and the police station replaced buildings. If that's true, then as a resident and as a taxpayer, I feel a lot more comfortable about moving forward with what I now accept and acknowledge is a need to replace these buildings. Because so much time has gone by and we residents have seen the various proposals. Maybe some are more tuned in than others, that's true. But I think key to what's important to me is where the Village Hall and the police station are located. And if they're centrally located, that takes away a lot of my concern. The other thing that I'd like to consider is what I hear on the street from other residents. And because of the other improvements, the higher density improvements, there's a lot of talk out there about, well, where's everybody going to park? The library parking is always full during the day, any time of the day. And I hear others say, well, they suspect it's because they're visiting friends or relatives that live in these new apartments or condominiums that have gone up. So I see a future need for parking, present and future, and the idea that's been expressed of maybe combining the new buildings with parking, I think is a good one. Just a quick third point, when I look at other municipal developments, we have public facilities such as our Village Hall. I think of Darien, I think of Woodridge, I think of the complex that's devoted for those purposes only, not combined with private development such as apartments or townhomes. So that's where I run into a little more question and perhaps confusion of, related to what occurred in the past. But these are like Naperville's, their city center is combined with a parking garage. Works well, completely, it appears to be completely devoted for that purpose. So that is my public input on the third point, which is let's keep it focused on municipal type buildings. The village needs should take priority, and I think what makes sense is to combine that with a parking facility. And that may not give the value, that may not add the value in terms of the income or helping to finance the development. But I do look and think of other examples of villages and cities in DuPage County and how they're set up. Thank you.
Please.
Hi, my name's Werner Weiss. I live in the condo building where Cadence is located, so I'm right here in the heart of downtown. As this development goes forward, I am kind of excited to see that this redevelopment is happening here. I hope that the fabric of downtown, the feel of downtown, can be extended over into this section. Curtis Street right now has nice-looking multi-family, multi-story homes on one side, and it has kind of a berm going down to an asphalt work area with some buildings there. I can imagine both sides of Curtis being really nice, and Curtis could become a real downtown street. I don't mean downtown like Main Street with a bunch of storefronts. I mean downtown like not not single-family homes the way that most of the rest of the town is, but something that feels like an extension of downtown, that adds value again to downtown, and that also adds value to whatever additional developments, be it an office building, be it townhomes or condos or whatever, happen on this site as it's used more efficiently. So Curtis Street, Washington Street, maybe, even rerouting how some of the streets go, maybe, I know there's a building there right now, but if Washington Street could actually head south instead of ending at a T intersection right at a train crossing, that sort of thing would be great to make downtown, more efficient and feel like a slightly larger, very attractive downtown.
Thank you. Please, David.
I'll say I'm encouraged to hear the idea that lessons have been learned, because I think that is the case, and that, as distressed as I am that it's taken this long, the fact that lessons have been learned should help us going forward. So that's very encouraging, and I hope the village council is able to convey that to people who have not been paying as close attention. Secondly, I'd pick up on, I think, the point Leslie and some others were making regarding the use of the space, in saying the following. We've come through a period where there's been a very intentional and deliberate effort to downsize government, which I don't think has necessarily been to the good. So I hope in planning for the space needs going forward that there's an openness to acknowledging that we look at whether or not some of whatever was the downsizing needed to be done or should be brought back in, and whether things that we haven't been thinking about as services that government provides should be included as something that space needs to be allocated for. And along that line, I would also, I guess, say that after going through the tour of both the police and the fire station, it struck me that, and reflecting on it further, that the police station has certain very specific needs that can't be provided in any other way. So that by definition, you can't just take the police and move them somewhere else. I don't know, and maybe it is true and maybe it isn't true, how much that same idea applies to what village government provides in the way of its services. Which is to say that for those things that are unique, clearly you want them to be part of whatever work is included in the building that the village comes up with. But if it should be the case that there are services that can't be accommodated in the building, if they're not unique services, then maybe live with the idea of putting them somewhere else if worse came to worse. I also have a couple of questions, though. One is, depending on how long all of this takes, is there a risk that a subsequent council would come along and be in a position to inhibit whatever had been put in place? And then along that same line, how do contingencies enter in, like should there be a recurrence of the kind of economic downturn that prevented, I think, some of the planning and processing that was going on back in 2007, 2008 with respect to the building?
Well, we have an election every 2 years. That's the answer to your question. As far as contingencies for things like economic downturn, contingency is probably not the right choice of words. We could always wait until we were sure there would never be such a thing, and then we would never stop waiting. That's always a risk. But what we found the last time that happened was, from a village standpoint, we ended up getting a lot of work done that we might not otherwise have done. And I'm overstating it, probably Dave was going to correct me here, but we were, at one point looking at doing like $25 million a year, or every 4 years or 3 years of stormwater stuff. And in the first period, we were able to do sort of the equivalent of about $32 million, because one of the net results for the public side of an economic downturn was, frankly, hungry contractors. And so there's always a risk that your public who's picking up the tab is suffering in such a way that they're not happy about it, to be sure. But I don't think you can operate under the premise that we're going to avoid doing something so we were more sure about the future. and it could result in us frankly getting a discount.
One other question related to what Marge brought up, and that was, do I understand that a performance facility, let's call it, would somehow enter into the conversation, or would not enter into the conversation, or am I misreading what you were asking?
I think there is a study that goes back some years. I'm not even positive.
2003.
Okay, even longer than I thought, so a long time, 15 years. That said that one of the things that they needed downtown is they had small performance spaces, they had large, but they had, like the Tivoli, but they had nothing that was medium-sized. And they were hoping that more or less, I believe, I'm remembering the study correctly, that any new village facility would have a meeting space with maybe a village council chambers that could double as something like that. So that is the only reason I bring that part of the discussion up, is that was where that was going. And so the question now is that still true? Is that something we should be considering? Is that something we've thought about? And that's kind of where I'm saying, well, we had these things we were asking for before. Are they still relevant or not? Should we be looking into something like that? And in performance can mean anything from, it's something because there's a lot of people attending a meeting, or renting it out, or letting the ballet company use it, or whatever it may be. That is that medium-sized kind of thing. Maybe it's a large school board meeting. You've got all kinds of things in between there, but I didn't identify it. I just know that it was part of the discussion at some point, and it no longer is. The question is, if we're building something like this, is this the time to be talking about it? Does this put too much of a burden on the facility or not? I don't know. So
I think it's just a great example of making sure that we answered this question during this, what's included in the projects.
And I think a few of us who just went through the campaigning process very recently heard that exact thing from residents, that they are interested in some type of flex space for things like that. So, again, while some of these other past projects have failed or have not finished, I think this allows us a unique opportunity to maybe look at things from 2003, which we didn't do the last couple of iterations.
Right.
So,
Exactly. One last point of clarification. On the idea of the identifying a preferred partner, given that you're describing this as something that the village is controlling the pacing on and so forth, at what juncture does the partner become identified, and then is the assumption that the partner is identified early on and then is in it? No.
No, development partner type. It's a townhouse development that partners with,
Okay.
not the townhouse developer. As an example, I'm not saying that's what it will be.
It's a
Just-
concept.
It's in concept, and then we get started and we build, and while our building is coming out of the ground, then we start the engagement to figure out who exactly, what exactly. I just wanted to chime in here, there's one area of disconnect I'm just hearing. I said earlier, the space program for the village police station and village hall is done. If we add things like, which is totally cool, we can do this, but if we're saying it might include this and it might include that, and maybe it looks like different, then this is not done. And this time frame needs to get substantially longer.
Thank you.
What we talked about in our LRP and high priority action item process was limiting the scope to Village Hall and Police Station as defined by our current Village Hall and Police Station and the needs for those buildings. We didn't talk about, public meeting spaces or performance spaces. We didn't talk about, frankly, green space. There were a variety of things like that we left out of that as we defined it being Village Hall and Police Station. Scope of operations of those two buildings as they sit now, plus obviously considerations of future, but that was sort of the definition of how space program was defined, not anything beyond that.
I'm going to just put a finer point on it, just to make sure that there's no missed expectations or surprises. Staff has been working with an architect to develop these options that you're going to see in January. We're knee-deep into them, we're 2 iterations in, and it was absolutely built on this. So, if, when you see these, you're saying, I'd like to relook at the scope of this project, that's why it will take quite a bit longer. It's taken us 3-4 weeks to get here. We're still iterations away from even being ready for this. So I just want to connect these dots. Okay, so that one, if the council directs that it's not what Mayor Barnett just said, I just want to, that's what you're going to see in January unless otherwise directed tonight.
Can I get a clarification? So kind of what I mentioned earlier, and then, but then also we had our one-on-one of, is this space really to that point where if you were to have any growth whatsoever, you would not have space for it? Because if that's a consideration, that is something that I have a little bit of a concern with.
So that's up for interpretation.
Okay.
For those of us on our team who feel like our current workspace model, one person permanently assigned to one space, that's their space, and if they're not here, nobody else uses it,
Yeah,
then there's no room for expansion.
okay.
If we're willing to relook at our workspace model, there's plenty of room. We can get way more efficient.
That was one of the things that would sort of end up in an FAQ, is there was some consideration in 14-ish about this, what does a workspace look like? Does a individual have an office?
Right.
And every individual has one? Is there a big group of cubbies? Is there a series of offices that are available for whoever is here at the moment and needs them? Those are all very different and end up driving very different sort of maximum space requirements. There's been, again, like many of these things, some fair amount of work done on the backside of that. And so
Space program we have now is super lean and pushes the boundaries of our current work model. It's not as lean as the shared workspaces we were talking about in 13 and 14.
So,
Go ahead.
then let me put a fine point on my answer then. If we can incorporate, say, green space through the site plan outside of the building, something like that, but if it means we're selling less land for development, but we're incorporating some of that, some green space, something to that effect. That's one thing I'm willing to consider. In terms of the building, I think, we need to build the right size building in the way that we project it, not just for our use now, but for 20 years from now. And if that's the building that we're talking about seeing on January 21st, then let's take a look at it. I see no reason to expand it.
One of the challenges is we've seen the trend in office-type development spaces is that they keep getting smaller and smaller for more and more people, not just in the public sector, but the private sector. The idea of expansion of services used to mean expansion of building. We're not so sure that's the case. On the police side, and Mr. Rose was talking about the hyper-specialty issues, some of those actually mean sort of that one-for-one relationship. Also, on the other hand, a lot of the specialty services provided in police stations, the space needs have been shrinking due to technology in some of their areas too. So it's not as straightforward as it was in 2008 when we built the fire station too. I know, Rich, I don't know what it's like.
Yeah, a couple things about expansion. I think the building should be designed in such a way where from day one if you can expand out or up, that foundations are put in place. It'd be easy to add another floor. It might get more complicated if we determine that we want a solar array on the roof or a green roof, but I think you take that into consideration. Regarding other utilization, in the Historical Society and PDHA, we're always putting on these events and we're looking for spaces, so a bunch of things pop through my mind as other places that have that, like the Lincoln Center has a delightful room upstairs. It's got a stage for performance type things. The library has their downstairs room that comfortably seats about 80 people. The rec center that the Park District has can comfortably seat about 100 people. We have one auditorium at a high school that has 1,200. seats. The one at South is 851 or something like that, growing to 1,200. And they also have a little theater there. So I think if we kind of asked ourselves the question throughout, where else can we use stuff? Where can we have cooperation? That might solve the problem without us having to.
That question was asked, and the deficit was in the middle range, in the 500, 600, 400 seat range. So I don't know that that's changed. There are smaller spaces, there are bigger spaces, but it's that mid-range that was the issue.
Dave, just to make sure I have my bearings, when I first started hearing about the plans were kind of two-sided. You had the combination facility, and then you had the possibility of two separate. In the space program that we're talking about the combined facility. I want to make sure I'm not.
Right now, every option we're putting forth so far is a combined building because of the efficiency it offers and shared spaces.
Okay.
So I just want to be clear for when you walk out at the beginning of where my head is. I essentially agree with where Greg is. I'm fine with this building, given everything that you have shared in terms of you can make things more efficient. I also think it may not be a bad idea to kind of see if maybe we can think about, okay, can we build up or out if we absolutely had to? And is that something that we could think about? Yes. And it will not drastically extend?
No, that stuff won't drastically. So
I'm comfortable with all of that.
Changes in the sort of fundamental elements of the space program will affect.
Right.
But the concept of, are we thinking for future expansion? I think we're good.
Great, then I am completely comfortable with the space program as it stands, as long as we can kind of figure out or negotiate if we need green space or whatever happens to.
However, I will tell you, just hearing everybody talk today is informing this team that's leading the design. So this is incredibly helpful and insightful.
So I'm good where we are.
Same. When you guys present the multiple options, can we at that point be told, like, this option allows for expansion, this option does not, or whatever it may be?
Depending on how quickly you can react, starting at 7:45 meeting tomorrow.
Okay. I'm just trying to see at what point we would be able to hear that when the option.
We'll know more after tomorrow morning.
It's very helpful to hear this. It's actually the timing perfect.
The question that I think I'm hearing most of us say we're in agreement on, though, is scope of inclusion, right? Mm-hmm. That this is activities at 801 and activities at the police station. Mm-hmm. That we're not talking about inclusion of other such things. Okay. That's an important distinction, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's
absolutely. Yeah.
The ability to go up. I mean, we're really just talking about the foundation and the materials that are used to construct the building, right? I mean, that's more of a design and construction.
Assuming parking ratios remain this. Fundamentally, yes, but when you get into, if somebody's going to partner with you, right, and you're maxed out on parking, if you add too much building space, you're going to have to go vertical on the, and did we plan for going vertical on the parking? Right. Those types of.
Yeah, sure.
Good point. There would be structural implications too. Your cost of construction on the lower levels would go up.
Sure, sure. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah. But fundamentally it starts with, did we build it strong enough to go up or out? Yeah.
Anyone else from the audience want to jump in? Please, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Jan Hessler. I've lived in this village for a long time. For those of you that might be as old as I am, I was the chairperson of the Brick Street Task Force. Does anybody remember that?
Thank you for that. We learned about that in the video that Doug did just a little while ago.
Oh, very nice. Anyway, I'm looking at page 3 of 5 here. How much will the project cost? And the last sentence says it will include allowances for any environmental sustainability component of the project. And I understand you've had quite a discussion on that. But my work as a research scientist tells me that this is a waffle sentence. So what I would like to see is a clear definition and picture of what type of sustainable energy sources you're going to use, such as solar, wind, or geothermal, as well as the storage for that energy, because it's not always constant. Now, maybe you've already put this into your plan and you've given a great deal of thought about this. It would be good to communicate that to the public when you do your communication part, because the word sustainable has as many definitions as there are human beings. So you've got to be very precise.
From the staff perspective, it is a waffle sentence. I love that. That's very helpful. What we're really trying to do here is we have not yet talked about that among this group of policymakers. And we envision, when we talk about what is it, and when we see how much it costs, what we envision is sort of giving ranges. It says if you want to add more environmental sustainability elements that look like this, you'd have to add this much money to your scope, and like that. So that by the time we go about designing it, not by here, but by the time we start engaging an architect to draw it, we will then go back to the council more of the details, the questions you asked. So we want to lay the groundwork for how much it will cost if we choose those things later, so we're not surprised. But then later on in the design process, we become specific, and this group of 7 would tell us what elements are being.
That word deliverable, which you have, you've got to decide tonight what your deliverables are. To me, deliverables is, what is your source of energy going to be? That is a deliverable.
It will be. It's not one of the deliverables for tonight. This is what we're doing tonight. These deliverables here. You're right. That's, what will our source of energy be? Will be part of what we end up having to decide.
Okay, I think you've got my point.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other council reactions or comments or inputs?
Nothing, Todd?
I just got, I got a couple of things here.
Well, then jump on.
That's
Well,
all anybody else.
To
That
your
means
point,
you.
Marge, you were talking about the resident engagement, and fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of you have been around for that, but there's some people on the council here that haven't lived in this probably town since 2007. Maybe not, there might be a couple in there. So I think that's important, even though it's rehashing, you have the information, it's just consolidating and posting it up, which is gonna take time. So I think the point's well taken, at least by me it was. But I think, you have all the information. And the last thing is, on the last recommendation, to pick one of those options, you were talking about performing arts, green space. At that point, it might be a little premature, and you don't know what the economy might be like, or what might be the best use for this land, having come off and spent all this time doing all this construction and planning and stuff. So I think that last option where you said pick the use, whether it's office, residential, apartment, townhouse, whatever it might be.
Yep.
That's it.
Do you feel like you've gotten clarity?
We've certainly got direction, clarity. I think we have learned a ton. We will probably have some follow-up questions as we move forward. Some of the things have become incredibly clear in direction. Some things I still have more question marks in, which was the purpose of tonight's meeting. So thank you. But we might have to check in again, both privately and then publicly, wrap back around in January. So where's Todd? Always asks me this. This is where I always say, yeah, I have clear direction. But this is the time to say, I think I have some areas I still need a little more work on. But this meeting was incredibly valuable to us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody that came and stayed tonight and offered their 2 cents. We appreciate that. Please don't avoid the next one. Come to the next one as well. We are trying to take steps forward here, and we really do want input. And as you heard tonight, we're hoping that a lot of people participate in our actual meetings. So please come again, and don't be shy on the emails. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.